we'll go ahead and get started. So just want to start by welcoming everyone and thank you for joining our webinar on reimagining the modern product organization. I'm Scott Brittain, our VP of Sales here at LaunchPad Lab. I'm joined by Ryan Francis, our president. And before we get started, wanted to just quickly run through a little bit more about LaunchPad and who we are, just to set some context. So founded in 2012, LaunchPad Lab is a technology consulting firm that builds high-impact digital products that drive business results. Really what we do is work closely with our clients to understand their unique business challenges and then design, develop, and deliver bespoke solutions to meet those challenges. We're headquartered in Chicago. We have a distributed workforce across the US. What we do is really just deploy small cross-functional teams and really specialize in building web and mobile applications that drive the business results. So with that, let's go ahead and get to the agenda. So we have a really exciting agenda for you guys today, really exciting topic, and really discussing how AI is revolutionizing the way that we build digital products. I think it's really relevant to businesses today that are seeing increased pressures to bring products to market faster. There's also this ongoing war of talent that continues to rage, and organizations are finding it very hard to find the right mix of skills and people to build their digital products. So we're going to kind of unfold really how AI is going to help revolutionize that, and specifically starting with some of the history and background of software development. We're going to show you some case studies and examples that are really interesting. From there, we're going to kind of go into the value chain and this idea that there's more to the people side of software development. We're going to explore what modern AI-enabled product teams can look like. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with some practical applications on how you can leverage this technology within your teams. So feel free to ask questions in the chat along the way. We'll get to those at the end. But without further ado, let's jump in. So Ryan, could you talk us through some of the history and evolution of software development?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to do my best to give a history lesson here. I was born in the late 80s, so might be missing some of the details, but I think in general, it's always helpful when you're looking at, sort of how software development is evolving, where it could be going in the future. I think it's always good to look at the historical context of where we've been and how it's been changing over time. Because the reality is, software development has changed a lot over the years. And what we're seeing is that in each decade, there's a new innovation, a new technology innovation that sort of kind of spurs change in the way that we go about software development. And I think right now, obviously, we're experiencing that with AI. So yeah, I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about kind of how software development has evolved over the years and what the implications of that are to this era that we're in with AI. So I always kind of like to first just start off with recapping like what software development really is. At LaunchPad Lab, we really think about software development as a kind of a combination of people, process, and technology. And at the center of all of that is communication. And I always like to remind people that, like, at the end of the day, software is code. Like we're writing code, and that code is, it's not this like mystical thing. Code is just language. It's language just like English is language that we use to communicate with each other. Code is language that we use to communicate with computers and to tell the computer how we want it to operate and how we want the software to behave. And so a lot of, when you really look at a software development process, the full cycle is really a communication process, starting with communication at the upfront discovery side to figure out what we're even going to build, figure out how the software even should work in its ideal state. And so you have communication between people, and then ultimately you have communication to the machine, to the computer, so it can operate the way you want it to operate. And so as we look at like sort of how software development has evolved over the years, a lot of it comes down to how communication has evolved and how easy it is to communicate both with each other and with machines and with computers.
Yeah, the thing I'd add in there, Ryan, too, is that, I know you always preach this as well, but, communication is so important in the products that we build internally here at LaunchPad, but it's also equally important for our clients and the way that our clients communicate to their clients, right, and their customers, right? So there's this chain of communication that's so important throughout the process. that if there's any type of breakdown in that communication, it could cause failure. So it really is kind of the linchpin of everything that we do.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree with that. And yeah, I think if you look at the history here, if you think back to when computers were originally invented, and by no means is this a comprehensive timeline. I think there is work happening even in the early 1900s on this front, but you sort of have this progression from originally to build software. You were working in what I would say is a more computer friendly environment. So you were coding and writing code in a way that was more friendly to the computer than it was to humans. But over time, we've been building technologies on top of each other, basically like a scaffolding of technologies that have made it more and more human friendly to write software. And so you can imagine that like maybe the ultimate realization, and perhaps the ultimate realization would be actually being able to just describe how you want something to work in plain English, and for it to then the computer would be able to understand that and be able to run the application based on that. And so over time we're moving in that direction. Coding has gotten easier and easier over the years. And I think one way to kind of illustrate that is just it's just looking back in time a little bit. This is a picture of some developers back in the day using punch cards, right? You'd have to actually punch these cards and put them in these large computers that were like the size of a room to run your program. And you can just imagine, like, if you think about processes that we have today, like agile development, how difficult it would be to conduct a process like that when, you had to work in this kind of what I'd say is more computer friendly environment than a human friendly environment. I think the Apollo 11 mission's a kind of a cool story to illustrate this as well. On the right, there's a picture here of the computer guide of the guidance system that was used to help our astronauts, land on the moon. And this system was actually crucial to the success of the mission. It actually saved the mission. There was an issue on the moon landing that the software, since it was developed and handled some of the complexity of the situation, was able to actually course correct an issue that came up to allow them to still land on the moon. So really critical piece of software. But what's amazing is just just kind of, they only had 72 kilobytes to work with, right? A very small amount of memory. And if you think about today, we have about a million times more storage space in a phone than what they were able to use for this computer that was running this amazing mission to land on the moon. You had like 400 people involved in this software development project. And on the right, you can kind of see like the code here on the right. And I don't know about you, but really hard to tell what that all means. So it just kind of shows you how, in order to go from actually articulating and understanding and defining how the software should work to ultimately turning that into like live code, functioning code, it was quite a process and very difficult. And so that's obviously changed quite a bit now. You don't, typically for, I think this program had something like 60,000 lines of code. For something of that size, you probably typically have maybe between 4 to 10 people working on a project like that. So compared to 400 people back then, things have gotten obviously a lot easier in terms of writing software today.
Yeah, I think one of the most mind-blowing things about this is this was only 55 years ago, right? The moon landing. And Ryan, you said it. I mean, the iPhone in our pocket today is 100, I think it was 100,000 times more computing power than what was on Apollo 11. I mean, talk about trusting in technology. I mean, those are true pioneers putting their faith in technology to get them, off this earth, which is, again, it's just mind-blowing to think about. I think that was only 55 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, 55 years isn't all that long, really, when you think about it. So, yeah, I think as we get back to this kind of timeline view of looking at how we've gone from, it's sort of being difficult to communicate with computers to being a lot more human friendly. There's been a few momentous inventions along the way. There's actually been tons of inventions. This is by no means comprehensive. There's been inventions in every decade. But some of the big ones to call out, back in, I think it was the 60s, the invention of high level languages came about. And this is basically moving from those punch cards into being actually able to write programs with text, using high level languages that compile down into what the computer needed to understand. And so this really just made programming more accessible. It made it, a lot more human friendly, and it allowed for the proliferation of programming jobs and programming opportunities. And so a lot more people got in it, sort of moved from this niche scientific world to being more business applicable as it became easier and easier to build software. In the 90s, we saw the invention of cloud compute, really with the adoption and the proliferation of the internet. It allowed us to move into developing, in the cloud as opposed to on premise and on location. And that had big implications to, if you think about the people and the process that you need to build software, being able to operate in the cloud as opposed to on-prem has huge implications. And Scott will talk about that here in a second. But then here, in the 2020s, what we're seeing is these large language models. And really, this is the first time in human history where we have a technology that is able to conduct more high level reasoning type activities, such as, writing working code. And so it really just opens the door for new ways of working, new ways of building digital products. And we're going to talk a lot more about that today. But I don't know, Scott, if you want to talk a little bit about, with these inventions that happened over the years, sort of how software development, both in terms of process and people, has kind of evolved alongside of that. I'll kind of share this piece here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, kind of reflecting back to the 60s and kind of the early days of development, really Ryan touched on it too early in the kind of the Apollo 11 example, is that you had these very large teams, right? Teams of 400 people building software that were highly specialized, right? These individuals that made up these teams were subject matter experts in one field, right? One discipline. And the knowledge that they had, was very deep versus broad, right? And the way that they delivered the software was very sequential, right? They used kind of the waterfall methodology, which really caused long development cycles from everything from design, development, and testing. These projects took years to build, right? Fast forward into kind of this more modern era of cloud computing, the idea of agile delivery practices is developed, right? The idea of scrum teams and asynchronous collaboration really brought these things to move faster, right? These projects to move faster. These are tech-infused project management capabilities that not only help the way that we build software, but to help the way that we manage the way we build software. So this really helped us move faster, it failed faster, and move in these more kind of development cycles that moved us from years to weeks and months. Fast forward to today, we're using a lot of those same practices that were kind of introduced kind of in that kind of modern era. But now we even see smaller teams, right? More highly capable teams that are able to kind of use technology and use AI to increase the output, right? We're accelerating that delivery process even further, and moving from weeks and months to days and hours, right? Ryan's going to show an example here soon of just how fast we can deliver projects. And it's really all kind of centered around AI and this idea of moving up the value chain. So that idea of the value chain. So, really the concept of a value chain really is specifically talking about software development, is that we see AI as moving folks up the value chain. And what we mean by that is that a greater percentage of someone's time can be spent on the higher value tasks than previously possible. So instead of doing lower level task management, teams can focus on higher strategic outputs that will really lead to kind of faster process and greater output ultimately. So with that, Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about what the value chain actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, I think a great way to illustrate this is just kind of seeing and what's possible now with these large language models. And I'm going to give an example here with ChatGPT using GPT-4, which if you're a programmer or interested in coding, don't use 3.5, use 4. You'll get a lot better output from it. But what I'm going to demonstrate here is basically the ability for developers now to be able to write plain English in work with an AI agent like a GPT-4 to get working code back, to translate that plain English into working code. This is just a demo I put together using GPT-4 here. And what you can see, I basically asked GPT to write a Ruby app that converts a number into a Roman numeral. Back in the day, this is actually a test we gave developers, and it was actually one of the first things that I learned when learning how to program was how to write this algorithm. So here, all I did was kind of give it instructions of this is what I want in plain English, and then I'm able to get this code back from ChatGPT. I just copy and paste it into my editor and run it, and we can see it actually works. It shows you exactly how to use it. You got to run the code and give it a number. So here I'm giving it 1005, and it gave back the Roman numerals. So it's just, I think for me, when I first saw ChatGPT do this, I almost fell out of my chair, right? As an engineer, when you see an AI system writing code, it's kind of mind bending, because I've always kind of felt like, if like coding would be one of the last things AI would be able to successfully do, because it does require so much reasoning and ability to really think through an algorithm or a problem. So pretty remarkable just to see that you can give it and with the right context, it can be successful in generating working code. And I've used it a lot over the last year since it came out, and can definitely confirm that by and large, it's very successful with this process. Certainly, there are things where working across a whole repo, for example, where it sort of struggles. But you can kind of see where things are going for sure in its ability to do this. See if I can keep I'll get past this screen here. There we go. So, what I want to kind of illustrate here with this value chain concept is, historically, developers have really spent a majority of their time in that kind of code writing part of the project. So a lot of times what I see with teams that have a software development practice in place is they'll have like a product manager, or maybe even a couple of people doing sort of product management, who are ultimately writing in plain English how they want the software to work. They're writing out user stories, acceptance criteria. They're defining the logic and the rules and the error states. And they're doing all of this in plain English. And then the developers are basically just taking that and like translating it into code. And so you see, majority of developer time is kind of in this, sort of translation or implementation side of it. But now that we have AI that's able to actually perform this translation, obviously there's some caveats here. But by and large, it's able to perform this translation for certain tasks, and certainly for one sort of algorithm at a time. What we're seeing is that this is starting to shift. You're starting to see developers' time shifting from primarily being on writing code to now starting to move up the value chain into more collaborative type activities, like frankly the design side of things, where developers are spending more time on the front end of the process, just trying to figure out how the software needs to work, how the features need to be designed, what the user experience should be, what type of logic and rules need to be put in place. And this is really the engineering work that people love, right? This is the problem solving that ultimately, if you could wave a wand, you could define how you want the software to work in English, and it would just work, right? The code would magically work. And I think that's sort of the direction we're going. And we're sort of moving that way. And so more and more, it's going to be it's really going to be developers spending a lot less time in code translation work and a lot more time in collaboration work and in design work, which in my opinion is moving them, up the value chain into higher value activities. So this value chain idea, I think it doesn't, it's easy to just say, okay, great, GPT, it's generating code. This is just affecting developers. The reality is it's affecting every role in the product development cycle. It's affecting product, it's affecting design, and it's certainly affecting development. And so on the screen here, you can see just a whole bunch of different tasks and responsibilities that these roles have. Product. There's tasks ranging from facilitating workshops, prioritizing and establishing the product roadmap, managing the team, to more, I would say, more tactical type of tasks like summarizing meeting notes or sharing project status updates. On the design side of the fence, you have designers facilitating design workshops, conducting user interviews, actually performing UI, actually doing the UI UX design work, down to the more tactical tasks related to, maybe just coming up with copy for their designs or generating some initial, coming up with some initial like conceptual wireframes, or even just like kind of generating and actually writing some of the markup to come alongside with those designs. And then obviously on the development side of the fence, you have, the more strategic tasks are around requirements gathering, exploring different ways to solve the problem through solution design activities, doing technical architecture design. And then the more mundane tasks for as you get to the more tactical stuff for developers, it's writing tests to automate the tests of the code that you're writing. We're seeing with GPT-4 really a lot of success with being able to say, hey, for this Ruby class that I wrote or this function that I wrote, write a automated test. And here's how I like to write my automated tests. And it's pretty successful with being able to automatically generate clean code for running these automated tests. So I think in general, what we're seeing is all of these tasks used to be done by humans, and I think there's a lot of teams who are still just sort of doing all of this themselves. But you really start to need to look at how can we augment our team with AI to make at least half of these tasks more efficient. So and in certain cases, maybe AI can do them completely independently or do get you 90% of the way there. And so this kind of just shows you how over time we're going to be moving from more tactical oriented tasks to spending a majority of our time, if not all of our time, doing this strategic work, which obviously is very exciting. I mean, this is going to translate to much better outcomes on our software projects. And this is the work we love doing right up here at the top. And so that it's just an exciting time. But yeah, that's kind of what we mean by value chain and sort of moving up the value chain. It's really moving from tactical to more strategic.
And Ryan, do you see as time progresses, the kind of white box moving up? So things that are maybe kind of in that kind of middle section start to get gobbled up by AI. And in your mind, like how does that change the way that the teams are structured?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely see that happening. I mean, it's always hard to say for sure just how far up it will go. I think everyone's trying to figure that out. But yeah, we're seeing it move that in that direction. I mean, certainly we don't anticipate that the models are going to get, dumber over time, so they're probably going to keep getting smarter. I think what I would expect is, there's going to be certain tasks that like, you're just probably never going to really have AI doing. I mean, frankly, like, doing the collaborative type of tasks that are truly more on that human to human communication. Those are going to be definitely tasks that, we need to stay focused on as humans. Right. But yeah, I mean, I think things like, I think you can be somewhat I don't know if confidence is the right word, but I think there's a good chance that eventually we're going to be doing all of our programming in plain English, and it'll be AI agents will be handling the actual sort of code generation and management. I mean that's a ways out, right? Like I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think that I would, based on what I'm seeing so far, I think it's probably inevitable that eventually we'll get to that point. So Yeah, I mean, some other things I'm not sure how far we'll get to is, just getting into UI UX design. Like, can AI really design like a designer can? I haven't seen that yet. So, I think these on the top, I'd say are largely going to stay human, but who knows, right? I definitely can't predict the future there.
Awesome.
So,
So
yeah, go
yeah.
ahead, Scott.
So what does all this yield? I think, we've had a great conversation today about just kind of the future of what AI can do for product teams. And I think it really comes down to kind of three core things. I think the first is really like modernizing teams as they are today. And what we mean by modern teams is really creating this idea of a smaller, more strategic team, where traditionally maybe you had, four roles in kind of like the product organization of like product or project manager, a scrum master, a business analyst. Maybe that role becomes kind of more unified in that sense, right? Where that it can start blending kind of tasks, and allowing roles like developers to stretch further, right? Maybe historically you're a front end developer, but with AI you can become more of a front and back end developer, right? You can become more full stack by leveraging technology to give you the skill sets that maybe you didn't have previously, versus like a very specialized skill set. And then I think also with modern teams, it's really about building the next generation, right? I think as the next generation comes up through the ranks and are building these digital products, organizations need to think about how do we accommodate for that next generation, right? If we want to hire and retain and attract the best talent, we really need to rethink the way that we're building software to be an attractive place to hire the best talent that's out there, right? No one wants to go work at an organization that has AS400s as a piece of software that they want to go work on. That's not exciting, right? So creating practices now that will kind of basically transform your organization to be a place that the next generation wants to work is very important. And I think secondly, building better products, I think, is at the core of this, right? Allowing the teams that build the products to focus on really what matters, and really honing in the product versus focused on the lower level tasks that we kind of talked about. We talked about better code coverage as well, right? If we can do more things, if we can cover more areas with AI, it'll allow fewer bugs and really allow us to build better software at the end of the day. And then finally, faster delivery, right? We're in a world that constantly is moving faster, and I think in order to get to that point that we want to be able to deliver code in hours and days instead of weeks and months. It's going to allow organizations to move to market faster, and frankly, it's going to allow those organizations that adopt this to create a competitive differentiation, right? There's if you can deliver a product to market 3 months faster than your competition, that's a huge advantage. So I think look for that as a key enabler to these AI enabled product teams. So with that, Ryan, anything to add on this slide before we wrap up to practical applications?
I mean, I think one thing that I'll just mention is what I've observed over my years in doing this work, and even being a developer myself, is I think it's important to give people ownership in the product development experience. And the bigger the team, the less ownership each individual on the team has. And so if you're able to smartly reduce team size without sacrificing expertise or quality, or timeline, it's just better for the products that we're building because each person then has a greater level of ownership. I'll give you an example here. I think if you think about back in the 60s, like you'd have like a hardware person on the team, you'd have like a networking person, you'd have obviously the programmer, you'd have all these different roles. And now I think we still have some of that. Like we typically see like a front end focused developer or a back end focused developer. But I see more and more that moving towards full stack, towards developers who can kind of code across both front and back end, using AI to help them through that process. If they get, maybe developers a little bit more comfortable in writing in JavaScript and React on the front end, but is dangerous on the back end, but just needs some help. Now they can have a pair programmer basically helping them through that process. And it kind of opens the door to say, well, maybe we could get away with a smaller team or having an individual basically be able to do more in the application. And that's just going to give them more ownership and frankly motivate them and get them excited about the work that they're doing, which I think does kind of deliver on what you're saying with like better products, more retention of the team, faster delivery, all of these things. So I think it's exciting. I think it's gonna, yield a lot, more developer happiness, frankly. I actually think it already is. I saw there was one morning where ChatGPT went down, and our team was like up in arms. I think one developer was like, I forget how to work without ChatGPT now, right? Like they're so used to pairing with this AI agent now, so they're already experiencing a lot of benefits and just happier workflows there.
All right, wrapping us up. So practical applications and next steps. Yeah, Ryan, do you want to talk through maybe some key takeaways that our audience here can benefit from?
Yeah, I think a few things that I would leave the audience with in terms of maybe practical takeaways or things you can take back to your organization. One would be who you're hiring. So it may be the skills that you're focused on hiring for. As we start to move up that value chain, and I mentioned, at the beginning that communication was at the core of software development. I think that's even going to be more so the case where hiring developers who do more than just code are able to actually, and interested in the front end of that process and really figuring out what should be coded, what the product really should be, how it should work, able to jump into those discovery conversations. I think that's going to be more and more important. And so, yeah, that's one thing where I think that kind of classic stereotype of, oh, the developer is kind of in a closet and doesn't talk to anybody, like that's just not going to fly in this world where, really they need to be, more of their time is going to be in those conversations, in that collaboration. It's not to say that like developers have to be extroverts. Some of the best collaborators and communicators that I know are introverted, frankly. I think it's more about their ability to communicate through written language, being able to encapsulate an idea and write it out and really think through a problem well. Those are going to be the skills that I think are going to be, as you look to, if you're hiring for developers, as you're scaling your team, I would start to prioritize those skills a bit more than maybe was applicable in the past. I guess another practical, trying to think, blanking. I don't know if you have any ideas to share too, Scott.
Yeah, well, I think one that came to mind for me was really kind of experimentation, right? I think like no one's going to flip the switch here and start using this to the full extent right away. But if you can find areas to experiment within your kind of portfolio today or your product portfolio, start small, right? No one says you have to kind of go all in. Do it in a smart way. See what works for you. The idea of like a hackathon is really good. We do a ton of hackathons here at LaunchPad where we kind of come up with ideas and brainstorm on how we can improve our processes. And I think like another kind of adjacent idea to this is like reimagining the way that your business runs today, right? Like taking a step back and saying like, let's look at our business process from end to end today. Where could AI or where could this kind of like product centric AI idea kind of stitch in, and start to evaluate that, right? And start to put together a roadmap to say, we think this is a great starting point. We see a lot of value in this area, right? We can kind of return quick results. I think like starting small, just kind of taking those bite-sized pieces is really kind of the kind of crawl, walk, run approach that we'd recommend.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been doing these AI opportunity assessments over the last year with a bunch of our clients around just exactly doing that. Basically, taking a inventory of how the business is operating today and kind of like a current state map of all of their processes in each department, and then identifying, okay, if we were to reimagine this with AI injected into the mix, how would this be? How would we set this up? And what we're finding is typically there can be quite a bit of change now and quite a bit of opportunity to drive more efficiency. Because the reality is just like, this is the first time in human history where we have the ability to leverage like intelligence, automatically at scale and programmatically, right? So, I definitely think it's a really good time to sort of rethink how the business is operating, maybe rethink certain processes that might be more, more manual than they need to be. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of companies who can kind of help you through that process as far as like conducting some type of like discovery and assessment, to help spur some ideas, bring some of that outside perspective, if you will.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, to wrap things up here, we're going to do a Q&A session now. So feel free to type any questions that you have into the chat here. We'll give you kind of 30 seconds or so to type any in that you have either on the content or around AI or kind of modern product teams. And we'll go ahead and kind of answer those questions live here. So no pressure on us. All right. Looks like there's one that came through here. The question is, what's going to be the biggest barrier to adoption of AI in the software development process?
Yeah, that's a good one for sure. I think from my perspective, I think the biggest barrier of AI adoption, and I've sort of already seen this, is just the change. When you have people are kind of used to doing things and I found that over the years that it's hard to get people to shift out of the way that they do things today. And so when you have something that causes so much disruption to maybe the way you're used to doing things, I think the biggest thing is just people opening their mind to like actually trying and seeing if maybe they can offload certain things to the AI instead of doing it themselves. I think I've seen generally more skepticism than sort of giving the AI the benefit of the doubt and seeing what it can do. And so, maybe flipping the mindset and taking that, you mentioned that experimentation attitude. I think that's the right approach, is to encourage experimentation. Obviously within bounds, like we need to make sure that from a security and risk perspective that, your organization has to have good governance in place on, what AI technologies the team can use, and make sure that they're not putting sensitive data into, potentially an open model that's being, accessed by other people. But I think, barring that, and that's an easy thing to, it's a pretty easy thing to address as far as just making sure, for example, you have like an enterprise edition of OpenAI, so that, anyone using GPT-4 is, that data is not going to be shared. But I think in general, it's like just getting people to start to test it and try it and start and give it the benefit of the doubt, as opposed to just assuming there's just no way this AI is going to be able to do this thing for me. I think you got to kind of play with it and see what it's capable of.
Yeah, great answer. Another one came through. He says, do you think understanding how to write code will eventually become a thing of the past?
I think that, it's funny because you look at the technologies that are still operational today. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that came out in the 60s, there's still a lot of those machines running. And I think there's still people programming in those old, Fortran and these old high level languages that originally came out back then. So I think there's a tendency for things that are built to stick around. I think it's going to take a really long time before you'd have a situation where like humans aren't involved in code. But I think I do think over time, like, it's going to be a lot more of like reviewing and approving and directing. So almost more of that technical architect type of role where you're reviewing a PR that an AI agent creates and then giving it direction on how to modify or how to reapproach the problem. And I think that it's going to move towards that model. So the challenge is going to be, I mean, as you think about fewer and fewer of those sort of tactical tasks, how do you train developers, right? If there's, how do you get developers ramping up from, we at LaunchPad, we have an apprenticeship program where we teach people the basics of coding. We move them up into junior developers and then into mid-level and the senior. And if the AI is able to do that kind of junior development type work, if it's able to even get into mid-level development, what's the ramp look like? That's a question that I have that I think could leave us with some gaps where, it's because you don't want to have someone trying to direct an AI and not really understanding how it's actually working under the hood. That could just result in disaster, I think. So there's a lot that needs to be figured out there. But yeah, I mean, I think over time, that's kind of where we're going. Obviously, I could be completely wrong. So, but that's just my current hunch.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, we got one more. It's a fun one. It's on the theme of Apollo 11 here. Do you think we'll land humans on Mars in the next 30 years?
Oh man, that's fun. What do you think, Scott?
Uh, I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Within the next 30 years, I think we're going to do it. I think technology is going to accelerate enough that we're going to get someone there. I think the hardest part is going to be obviously the journey out there. But I don't know. It's not going to be me. I'll tell you that much. I trust technology, but I don't trust it to take me to Mars.
Staying here on Earth. Yeah, I think I'm with you on that.
They implanted it.
That's awesome. No, yeah,
All
I
right.
agree with
Well,
you. I agree with that.
yeah, awesome, awesome. Well, thanks everybody again for joining. This was great. Our email addresses are here if you want to follow up with us. Any questions that you have, we're happy to have a conversation. But we hope you enjoyed the content today, and yeah, look forward to talking to you all in the future.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. We appreciate it, and yeah, hope you found it valuable. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, take care.